Hey guys, you're watching Let's Talk About Prepping. I'm Tyler, your host, and this video is going to be part 2 to my video response to Steve over at Corsair Trainers and his tabletop exercise concerning what you should do in the first minutes and hours and days following an EMP event. Now, events like EMPs may not necessarily be extremely likely, though many people think that they are of a likelihood that they could happen at any moment, and we wouldn't know. So it's good to look at this because it is both an event that does not necessarily cause immediate catastrophic results for the vast majority of the populace, but which starts a ticking clock in which every minute may count and short-term actions may have long-term consequences. So it's good to look at this because often when we talk about these kinds of serious events, we talk about them extremely hypothetically. And it's really valuable to sit down and ask yourself, what is it going to be like when you actually find yourself in that circumstance? And what are you going to need and want to get done? And what are you going to need to get those things done? Looking at these things from this down-to-earth perspective is going to help you, and has already helped me and many others in this exercise that Steve started, to look at our preps and our plans in a really down-to-earth fashion without a lot of the BS, and really start to realize where the gaps are in our preparations for some of these events. So today, we're actually going to take a step back and look at what an EMP event is and how we might want to prepare for it, because there are some things that we need to be concerned about before it happens, which will be of the utmost concern in those first few minutes, and we'll get to that here in a minute. First, let's look at what an EMP is. Now, in one of my first few videos, I did a 3-part video series of pretty long videos, 10 to 15 minutes each, really getting into depth about what an EMP and a CME is. Now, I only have a layman's research understanding of these things, but I have noticed that there is a lot of hypothetical knowledge being passed around by people who haven't done the research themselves, but sort of accept the common acceptance of knowledge for themselves and repeat it. Now, this is mostly okay because we often talk about hypothetical situations, but there are a lot of things that get bandied about that could affect our preparations and our plans in the first few minutes. So let's have a basic understanding of what an EMP or CME event is. An EMP is an electromagnetic pulse, and a CME is a coronal mass ejection. Now, coronal mass ejection only occurs from the sun. This is an ejection of sun matter from the surface of the sun, or the corona of the sun, actually, which is not quite on the surface of the sun. This charged plasma flies through space slower than the speed of light, but at the same time, there often is a solar flare, or EMP, associated with a coronal mass ejection. Now, this solar flare may be of concern to us, but often it is not the direct source of concern with a CME. The solar flare travels at the speed of light, and if it is facing the Earth at the time that it happens, it could have an effect on us. But largely, this is what causes aurora borealis, the northern lights, and other effects like that, and often radio interference. But a coronal mass ejection is actually charged particles flying out from the sun, and while they move extremely fast for mass, and they travel to the Earth much faster than we will likely ever be able to travel towards the sun, it still takes them a couple of days, or at most, at least 12 or 18 hours to travel the distance from the sun to the Earth. But when they get here, they have a very powerful effect on the local space environment around the Earth. And this is where they start to have a similar effect to a nuclear EMP weapon. A nuclear EMP weapon is using the electromagnetic effects of a nuclear detonation to cause disruption to electronics on the ground or in the air. How this works is that during a nuclear detonation, all kinds of energy are released. Light, heat, and energy across the entire electromagnetic spectrum, because this is just what happens when you turn matter into energy. It goes off in all directions. Now, when they first detonated nuclear weapons over the Pacific Sea, they realized this effect when they actually caused an EMP event in Hawaii, destroying many electronics and a lot of the infrastructure. They began to do research on the effects of this weapon, and during the fishbowl tests, they detonated nuclear weapons above some of the radiation belts in space. Yes, they tested nukes in space. Of course we did. What they found is that these EMPs affected the local electromagnetic environment around the planet. The electromagnetic shield around the Earth, which protects us from the solar radiation and solar winds, which would otherwise boil the surface and kill all life on Earth. Now, these bands of electromagnetic radiation usually stay pretty stable around the Earth, being affected by things like solar winds and causing radio interference and aurora borealis, like we mentioned. But during a nuclear EMP event, or if a CME happens to line up and hit Earth, it can greatly distort the fields of electromagnetic energy around the Earth. And this is what causes some of the most devastating effects during an EMP event. Not actually the direct energy from the nuclear weapon, but actually from the electromagnetic cascade and the charged particle cascade which it causes by pushing those field lines down to ground level. And it's actually a lot of the existing radiation around the Earth which will be frying our electronics. Now from here, it's important to realize that this is somewhat directional, and while there is some scattering of this energy bouncing up and down between the atmosphere and the Earth, the majority of the energy will be somewhat directional if you are not in the direct environment under the field of effect. What I'm saying is that if this detonates over the center of the United States, and you're where I'm at in the Northwest, it will be extremely directional, pointing towards the direction of the sky where that EMP is coming. If you're on the other side of a thick concrete and steel building from that direction, you may well experience little to no effects in your car or in protected electronics in that area. However, there are a lot of effects that come into this, including propagation, meaning that even if you are over the horizon, there may be points where those field waves realign and cause devastating effects. What I'm trying to say is that there will be an extremely wide range of intensity in the effects of some of these events. And we have to remember that some of them may go dud and not work nearly as well as expected, and there will be next generation technology possibly capable of causing extremely far worse effects than what we expect or talk about in prepping communities. So I think it's extremely valuable to keep an open mind to what these effects will be, because regardless of what gets passed around in prepping communities, this is something that is not fully understood, and at least to the public knowledge has not been tested nearly as fully, say, as the effects of nuclear weapons themselves were back in the day. What I'm telling you is that there is nothing concrete that we can expect to see in an EMP or CME event. So it's best to expect that there will both be less effects than we expect in your local area, and also worse effects than we often talk about. What are some of these events and effects is something that I want to talk about regarding some of our concerns in minute 0 or -1. What I'm talking about is preparing before the event. Now, what we're talking about in this tabletop exercise is what you want to do in the first minute and the minutes following an EMP or CME event, where you realize that all electronics have failed due to electromagnetic saturation. One of the things that I want to point out is there will be an immediate fire hazard and a hazard from the catastrophic failure of any electronic systems. Now, I'm not sure, but I believe that many elevators are held by active electronic braking. Many are probably equipped with redundant mechanical systems that will clamp into place if all electronic systems fail. But any devices or machinery that are kept in a safe position using active electronic braking will fail. And if you are standing on the threshold of an elevator that fails, you will likely be cut in half. Pacemakers may well fail catastrophically, and I expect that many of the transformers on power poles will explode simultaneously, making the whole neighborhood, and in fact whole cities, sound like they're being subjected to a bombing run. Now you can extrapolate from here. You have to imagine that we're talking about an extreme saturation of electromagnetic energy, which focuses often on long-standing wire, so power lines on telephone poles, and perhaps on coiled metal. Now what I'm talking about is alternators and stators in engines, generators, and other devices. These may actually gather so much energy that they glow red hot and fuse or melt through things and start fires. And so this is one of our first concerns even before the EMP event and immediately afterwards, is what hazards do we expose ourselves to on a daily basis concerning devices which are either held safe using electricity or which would be dangerous to be nearby or which may cause fire hazards during one of these events. Now, I'd like to point out that some lithium-ion cell phone batteries already explode or melt catastrophically, causing injury. And I do often wonder if these things might occur to many cell phones or other similar devices like laptop transformers and stuff like that in such an event. So one of the first things that I would be worried about following an EMP if I myself wasn't in any immediate danger, for instance, if I wasn't driving a car at 60 miles an hour, which is something you want to consider if you do that a lot. If I was in a relatively safe position when this first happened, I would immediately grab a fire extinguisher and start walking around and smelling for the smell of burning metal or plastics. Because following this event, I expect that many electronic devices will have small bits of red hot metal inside of them, and small fires may spring up even 20 to 30 minutes after the initial event in spots that you don't expect. So I don't think that it's a good idea to necessarily go running out of the house immediately because it seems safe, because your flashlight might be starting a fire in the bottom of one of your bins. And you may come back to find that 1 hour after you left, a conflagration started and destroyed everything. Now, again, I also want to point out that if you rely on electronics to be safe on a minute-to-minute basis, you may want to consider whether or not this will be affected in an EMP event or whether you're concerned about that. That includes pacemakers and any machinery or vehicles that you use that are actively kept safe using electronic systems. If you work or live in an environment where a catastrophic loss of electricity or a catastrophic concentration of electricity would be hazardous to you, it's something to consider. Now, I don't necessarily know that many devices will explode catastrophically in a shower of sparks like you see in movies, but I don't rule it out, and I believe that some things may be in danger of that, especially large medical equipment hooples. So it's all definitely something to consider, because I think that there may be immediate catastrophic results from the EMP or CME event, aside from all the lights go out. It could be possible that every light bulb explodes around you, and that your cell phone starts trying to melt through your leg, and multiple devices glow red hot and start fires in nearly every building around you. It's important to consider these things, and to consider your minute-to-minute safety and what you rely on to simply not die, to do your job or to live. Anyways, I hope that was some interesting thoughts, and I do plan on coming back into this tabletop exercise and sharing some of what I would plan to do in the first minutes following such a thing. But I just wanted to share some of my thoughts about what we might see, and just a little bit of a basic understanding of these events. I hope that was interesting, and if I missed anything, please do share in the comments down below. Go ahead and check out Steve over at Corsair Trainers and his tabletop exercise concerning this if you haven't yet, and some of the others. Just off the top of my head, I know Westwind Survival and High Desert Pioneer and Just in Time Prepping have all responded to this so far. If anybody else has, please do let me know and share links. Hope you're all doing well. Everybody stay safe out there.